Sometimes the heart finds love in the most unexpected places, and sometimes it takes a lifetime of pain to recognize true kindness. We all know what it feels like to be overlooked, to watch others walk away when life doesn't meet their expectations. On a dusty platform in Gilead Flats, Alma Hayes sat in her wheelchair as another potential suitor took one look at her paralyzed legs and disappeared into the crowd. The mail-order bride advertisement promised a refined woman, but never mentioned the fever that stole her ability to walk. Then Boone McCall, a towering cattleman with his own broken heart, heard something in her bitter laughter that called to his loneliness. He offered her something no one else had: genuine kindness and a place to belong. But when drought threatens their fragile new life together, will their bond survive the coming storm? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered wooden platform of Gilead Flats, where Alma Hayes had spent another sleepless night, wondering if today would bring yet another rejection. Her fingers traced the yellowed edges of sheet music that peeked from her worn leather satchel: Mozart's Sonata in C major, Bach's Prelude in D minor, hymns she'd played countless Sundays when her world was different, when her legs still carried her to the church organ bench, when the congregation knew her as the refined Miss Hayes who could coax angels from those ivory keys. The prairie fever had changed everything 3 years ago. What started as a simple headache during harvest season became delirium, then paralysis that crept up her spine like frost claiming summer flowers. The doctor in her hometown of Cedar Creek had been honest, if not gentle. "The inflammation has damaged the nerves permanently," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "I'm sorry, Miss Hayes, but you'll never walk again." Her savings had dwindled quickly after that. The church could hardly afford an organist who needed help climbing the steps to the loft. The music lessons she'd given to supplement her income became impossible when students' parents whispered about her condition being contagious, despite the doctor's assurances otherwise. Pride had kept her from accepting charity for months, but eventually even pride couldn't pay for food and medicine. The mail-order bride advertisement had seemed like providence when she'd first seen it in the territorial newspaper. Refined woman of good character sought for companionship and housekeeping. Must be of moral standing and pleasant disposition. Respond to Gilead Flats territory office. She'd written her response with shaking hands, her penmanship still elegant, despite everything. She'd been honest about her age 46 was hardly a spring chicken, and her skills with household management, cooking, and music. What she hadn't mentioned was the wheelchair. Perhaps that had been dishonest, but desperation makes cowards of us all. She'd told herself that a good man would see past her limitations, that character mattered more than physical capability. The harsh reality of the past weeks had proven her naive optimism wrong, time and again. The stage agent, Walter Grimm, wheeled her trunk into the shade of the platform's overhang for what felt like the 100th time. He was a decent man, weathered by years of frontier life, but still possessed of basic human kindness. His wife, Martha, had taken to bringing Alma meals and gentle conversation, though both women pretended not to notice the pity in the gesture. "Another one's coming on the noon stage," Walter said, adjusting his hat against the climbing sun. "Fellow named Patterson owns a dry goods store 2 towns over. Says he's looking for a woman who can help with his bookkeeping." Alma nodded, smoothing her best-dressed navy blue with tiny pearl buttons, carefully mended where the fabric had worn thin. "I'm grateful for your patience, Mr. Grimm. I know this situation is irregular." "Nonsense," he replied, but his eyes held that familiar flicker of discomfort that people got when faced with circumstances beyond their understanding. "Every soul deserves a chance at happiness, Miss Hayes. The right man will come along." The words were kind, but they both knew the truth. 3 weeks, 11 potential suitors, and 11 polite but firm rejections. Some men had the courtesy to invent excuses about wanting a younger woman or needing someone with farming experience. Others simply stared at her wheelchair for a long moment before tipping their hats and walking away without a word. The heat was building toward midday when the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. A lone rider approached from the direction of town, sitting tall in the saddle of a sturdy bay horse. Even from a distance, Alma could see he was a big manat, just tall, but broad-shouldered, in the way that spoke of years of hard physical labor. Boone McCall dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd been riding since childhood. He was older than most of the men who'd come calling, perhaps in his mid-50s, with greying hair beneath his worn hat and lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. His clothes were clean but well used, the practical garments of a working rancher. "Afternoon, Walter," he said, his voice carrying the deep, measured tones of a man who chose his words carefully. "I'm here for feed and supplies. Martha said you might have some of that liniment for the horses." "Sure thing, Boone. It's in the office." Walter glanced meaningfully at Alma. "Miss Hayes, I'd like you to meet Boone McCall. He runs cattle about 10 miles south of here." "Boone, this is Miss Alma Hayes." Boone removed his hat, revealing hair that had once been dark brown but now showed silver threads throughout. His eyes, Alma noticed, were a warm brown, and when he looked at her, he actually looked at her, not at the wheelchair, not with pity or discomfort, but at her face. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Hayes," he said with a slight nod. "I hope you're finding our territory to your liking." "It's quite beautiful," Alma replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "The sunsets are particularly spectacular from this platform." Something flickered in Boone's expression, recognition, perhaps, of someone else who'd spent time watching the sky change colors while contemplating life's unexpected turns. "Yes, they are. The wide sky out here has a way of putting things in perspective." Walter cleared his throat. "Miss Hayes is, well, she's been waiting for the right opportunity," Alma interrupted smoothly. She'd learned to navigate these conversations with as much dignity as possible. "I'm a music teacher and pianist, looking for a position where I might be useful." Boone's eyes brightened with genuine interest. "A pianist? That's a rare skill out here. My late wife used to play, though we never had a proper piano. She made do with a little pump organ that wheezed more than it sang." The mention of his wife hung in the air for a moment, and Alma saw the shadow of old grief cross his features. She recognized it, the look of someone who'd learned to carry loss without letting it define them entirely. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "Music has always been my greatest comfort during difficult times." "Thank you. Eleanor passed 5 years ago, come autumn. She always said music was the closest thing to prayer she knew." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "Forgive me if this is forward, but are you planning to stay in Gilead Flats long?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Alma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "That depends on whether I find a suitable position. I'm between situations at the moment." Walter busied himself with organizing papers, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. The stage agent had witnessed enough of these delicate negotiations to know when to make himself scarce. "Miss Hayes," Boone said, settling his hat back on his head, "would you mind if I spoke plainly?" "I would prefer it, Mr. McCall. I couldn't help but notice your circumstances, and I wonder if you might be interested in a proposition that's more practical than romantic." Alma's heart began to beat faster. In her experience, men who spoke of practical propositions usually had something other than propriety in mind. But something in Boone's manner, the respectful distance he maintained, the way he addressed her directly rather than speaking around her, suggested otherwise. "I'm listening," she said carefully. "I run a small ranch, cattle mostly, some horses. It's not much, but it's peaceful, and the work is honest. I've been managing alone since Eleanor died, and I'll be frank with you, I'm not good company for myself anymore." The silence gets heavy after a while. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking lately that I should learn to read better. Never had much schooling, and Eleanor used to read to me in the evenings. I can manage ledgers and such, but books, well, that's beyond me, and I imagine you get tired of silence too." Alma blinked, not certain she'd heard correctly. "Are you offering me employment, Mr. McCall?" "Room and board, and access to Eleanor's old organets, not much, but it still plays. In exchange, maybe you could help me with my letters, and I could use the company of someone who appreciates a good conversation. Nothing improper, of course. You'd have your own room, and I'd make sure you had everything you needed to be comfortable. The offer was so unexpected, so free of the awkwardness and pity she'd come to expect, that Alma found herself momentarily speechless. Around them, the sounds of the frontier town, continued horses neighing, wagon wheels creaking, the distant laughter of children playing in the dust. "You haven't asked about my condition," she said finally. Boone's expression remained unchanged. "I can see you're in a wheelchair, Miss Hayes. What I can't see is how that affects your ability to teach someone to read, or to appreciate good conversation, or to make music. Unless you're planning to chase my cattle on foot, I can't see how it matters much." For the first time in 3 weeks, Alma felt something other than despair. Not hope. Exactly, she'd learned to be cautious of hope, but something like possibility. A chance to be useful again, to be valued for what she could do, rather than diminished by what she couldn't. "The ranch is quite isolated," she said, testing the waters. "What would people think about such an arrangement?" "People will think what they want to think, regardless of what we do," Boone replied. "But anyone who knows me knows I'm not the type to take advantage of a lady's circumstances. And anyone who gets to know you will see that you're not the type to compromise your principles for convenience." He was right, of course. The frontier was full of unconventional arrangements born of necessity and survival. Widowed women ran boarding houses for unmarried men. Bachelors hired housekeepers who lived under their roofs. As long as propriety was maintained, most people understood that survival sometimes required flexible definitions of convention. "I would need to maintain my independence," Alma said. "I won't be treated as a charity case or made to feel beholden beyond the terms of our agreement." "Wouldn't dream of it. This would be a fair trade your skills for room and board. Nothing more, nothing less." The midday sun was beating down mercilessly now, and Alma could feel perspiration gathering beneath her collar. But for the first time since arriving in Gilead Flats, she felt something other than the weight of rejection settling on her shoulders. "When would you need an answer, Mr. McCall?" "No rush. Take your time to think it over. I'll be in town until evening if you'd like to discuss it further." As he walked toward the station office to conduct his business with Walter, Alma found herself studying the sheet music in her satchel with new eyes. Perhaps these yellowed pages weren't just reminders of what she'd lost, but seeds of what she might yet become. The afternoon stretched before her, full of possibility she hadn't dared to imagine just hours before. For the first time in months, Alma Hayes began to plan for tomorrow, instead of simply enduring today. The noon stage arrived, with its familiar cloud of dust and thunder of hooves, carrying with it Thomas Patterson and Alma's dwindling hope. She watched from the platform as he descended, a thin man in his 40s, with nervous eyes that darted everywhere except toward her wheelchair. His conversation with Walter lasted barely 5 minutes before he climbed back onto the stage, claiming urgent business elsewhere. Alma's laugh came out bitter and sharp, cutting through the afternoon heat like a blade. She'd perfected that sound over the past 3 weeks, the laugh that said she expected nothing different, that disappointment was simply another passenger on life's long journey. But today, for the first time, someone heard something else in it. Boone McCall stood near the station office, a bag of feed slung over his shoulder, and that hollow sound seemed to stop him in his tracks. His weathered face turned toward her, and in his brown eyes she saw recognition not of her circumstances, but of her pain. It was the look of someone who understood that laughter born of hurt was sometimes the only alternative to tears. He set the feed bag down and approached her slowly, as if sudden movements might startle her into deeper withdrawal. "Miss Hayes, I hope you'll forgive the presumption, but I've been thinking about our conversation earlier." "Have you?" Alma managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "And what conclusion have you reached, Mr. McCall?" "That maybe we both need what the other has to offer more than either of us wants to admit." The simple honesty of his words caught her off guard. She'd expected pity, perhaps awkward consolation, but not this straightforward acknowledgement of mutual need. Around his left ring finger, she noticed he still wore a simple gold band thin from years of wear, but maintained with obvious care. "I'm not sure I follow your meaning," she said, though something in her chest was beginning to loosen. Boone removed his hat and ran his fingers through his graying hair. "I've been alone on that ranch for 5 years, Miss Hayes. 5 years of talking to cattle and horses because they're the only things that listen without judgment. 5 years of eating meals in silence and watching the sun set over empty chairs." He gestured toward the departing stage. "That man just walked away from you without even taking the time to learn your name. And I'm standing here wondering how someone can be so foolish as to miss the obvious. Which is that you're exactly what you advertised to be, refined woman of good character who happens to use a wheelchair. Nothing more, nothing less." Alma felt something shift inside her, like a door that had been locked for months, suddenly finding its key. "And what would you get from this arrangement, Mr. McCall? Besides reading lessons and conversation, the chance to stop rattling around that house like a ghost haunting his own life." His voice carried a weight that spoke of more than simple loneliness. "Eleanor and I, we had plans. We were going to fill that house with children, with music, with all the sounds that make a place feel alive. After she died, I kept thinking maybe I just needed time to grieve. But 5 years later, I'm still waiting for something to change." The admission hung between them, as honest and raw as anything Alma had heard since arriving in Gilead Flats. She understood the particular cruelty of houses that echoed with memories of happier times, of spaces designed for company that had become monuments to solitude. "I should tell you," she said carefully, "that I'm not looking for a husband. I've come to terms with the fact that romantic love may not be part of my future. And I should tell you that I'm not looking for a replacement for Eleanor. What I'm looking for is the chance to be useful to someone again, and maybe find some peace in having another person share the space I've been guarding like a tomb." The frankness of their exchange was refreshing after weeks of coded conversations and polite rejections. Here was a man who spoke directly about difficult things, who didn't dress up harsh realities in false comfort. Alma found herself responding to his honesty with her own. "I can't promise to be easy company," she said. "I have dark days when the pain is bad, and I'm not always gracious about accepting help when I need it. I can't promise to be easy company either. I've forgotten how to talk to people about anything besides weather and cattle prices. And I have a son I haven't spoken to in 3 years because I'm too proud to write the letter I know I should write." The mention of his son came out like a confession, and Alma saw the grief in his eyes deepen. Whatever had happened between them, it was a wound that hadn't healed, despite the passage of time. 3 years is a long time," she said gently. "Too long. Thomas left after we had words about his choice of wife, said things I shouldn't have said, and he returned them in kind. By the time I realized I was wrong, he was already gone." Boone's fingers worried the brim of his hat. "I keep thinking I should reach out, but I don't know how to start. Never was good with words on paper." "Perhaps that's something we could work on together," Alma suggested. "Along with your reading lessons. You'd be willing to help me with that?" "I'd be honored to help you with that." The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Around them, the town of Gilead Flats continued its quiet business children playing in the dust, women hanging laundry, men tending to horses and equipment. It was a scene of ordinary life continuing despite the extraordinary conversation taking place on the platform. "There's something else you should know," Boone said, his voice dropping lower. "The ranch isn't much to look at. I've let things slide since Eleanor died, and it shows. The house needs work, the barn needs repair, and I'm not the tidiest housekeeper you'll ever encounter. I'm not looking for luxury, Mr. McCall. I'm looking for purpose. And I should mention that we're about 20 miles from the nearest neighbor. If you're someone who needs regular social interaction, you'll find it lonely out there." "I've been lonely in crowded rooms," Alma replied. "Distance from other people isn't what makes a place feel isolated." Boone studied her face, and she had the sense he was seeing past her words to the truth beneath them. "You're not what I expected when I rode into town today, Miss Hayes." Nor are you, Mr. McCall. Walter Grimm emerged from the station office, clearly having given them as much privacy as he could manage. Stage to Cedar Creek leaves in an hour if you need to send any messages, he announced, then retreated again with admirable discretion. I suppose we should discuss practical matters, Alma said. When would you want me to start, if I accept your offer? Whenever you're ready. I could take you out to see the place first, if you'd like. Make sure it's suitable before you commit to anything. I trust your description was honest. Perhaps too honest. I may have undersold the charm of the place. For the first time in weeks, Alma felt the stirring of genuine curiosity about her future. Very well, Mr. McCall. I accept your proposition. They shook hands formally, her small fingers dwarfed by his calloused palm. The contact was brief, but somehow significant, the first time in months that a man had touched her without awkwardness or hesitation. I'll bring the wagon around tomorrow morning, Boone said, unless you'd prefer to wait longer. Tomorrow morning would be perfect. As he walked away to collect his supplies, Alma caught herself humming softly a hymn she'd played countless times but hadn't thought of in months. The melody seemed to rise from some deep place in her memory, carrying with it the promise of music yet to be made. Walter approached with her evening meal, prepared as always by his wife. Sounds like you've reached a decision, he said kindly. I have. Mr. McCall has offered me a position as a teacher and companion. It's exactly what I've been hoping for. He's a good man, Miss Hayes. Lost his way a bit after his wife died, but his heart's in the right place. Yes, Alma agreed, watching Boone load his wagon with supplies. I believe it is. That night, as she prepared for what would be her last evening on the platform, Alma carefully folded her sheet music and placed it in her satchel. Tomorrow, she would begin a new chapter of her life, not as a rejected mail-order bride, but as a woman with purpose and possibility stretching before her like an unwritten song. The wagon ride to Boone's ranch took them through 20 miles of rolling prairie, where the morning sun cast long shadows across grass that rustled like whispered secrets in the wind. Alma's trunk and few belongings were secured behind them, while she sat on the wagon seat beside Boone, marveling at how different the world looked when viewed as a destination rather than an escape. The house sits in a small valley, Boone explained as they crested a hill. Eleanor chose the spot because it's sheltered from the worst of the winter winds, and there's a good spring that runs year-round. As they descended into the valley, Alma saw what would be her new home spread before Thema modest frame house, with a wraparound porch, flanked by a weathered barn and several outbuildings. It was exactly as Boone had described, showing signs of neglect but possessing an undeniable charm, like a favorite book whose pages had grown soft with handling. It's lovely, she said, and meant it. The house had good bones, and the setting was peaceful in a way that spoke to her soul. Eleanor planted those roses by the front porch, Boone said, gesturing toward bushes that had grown wild, but still bloomed with determined beauty. She always said a house needed flowers to feel like home. They pulled up in front of the porch, and Alma immediately assessed the challenges ahead. 3 wooden steps led to the front door, manageable for someone on foot, impossible for someone in a wheelchair. Boone seemed to read her thoughts. I've been thinking about building a ramp, he said. Should have done it before bringing you out here, but I wanted to see exactly what would work best. A ramp would be helpful, Alma agreed. But for now, would you mind helping me up the steps? I can manage most things once I'm inside. Boone's assistance was matter-of-fact and respectful, lifting her chair with ease while she held onto the armrests. Once on the porch, she had her first clear view of the valley stretching away in all directions, ocean of grass beneath an impossibly wide sky. The isolation is quite complete, she observed. Does it bother you? No, I find it rather peaceful. The inside of the house revealed the hand of a woman who had cared deeply about creating a warm home. The main room held a stone fireplace, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation, and built-in bookshelves that were mostly empty. A dining table sat near windows that looked out toward the barn, and beyond that, a kitchen that was functional, if not fancy. Your room would be here, Boone said, opening a door off the main room. It was Eleanor's sewing room, but it gets good light and has its own entrance to the porch if you need it. The room was perfect for her, neat, spacious enough for her wheelchair, with windows on two sides and a door that opened directly onto the porch. Most importantly, it was on the ground floor, eliminating the need to navigate stairs. "Where do you sleep?" she asked. "Upstairs. There's a loft that runs the length of the house. You'd have complete privacy down here." As they toured the house, Alma noticed signs of a man living alone, dishes in the sink, clothes draped over chairs, dust on surfaces that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. But underneath the neglect, she could see the care that had once been lavished on this place. "Eleanor's organ is in the corner there," Boone said, pointing to a small pump organ covered with a sheet. "I kept it covered to protect it from dust, but it still plays." Alma wheeled over and pulled back the sheet, revealing a beautiful walnut instrument with ivory keys yellowed by age. She pressed a few keys experimentally, and the organ wheezed to life with a sound that was indeed closer to breathing than singing. "It has character," she said diplomatically. "That's a polite way of saying it sounds like a dying horse." Despite herself, Alma laughed. "I've worked with worse instruments. This one just needs some attention and regular playing to keep the bellows working properly." They spent the rest of the morning discussing practical arrangements. Boone would move his belongings to give her easier access to the kitchen and main room. He'd build the ramp as soon as possible, and in the meantime, he'd help her navigate the steps as needed. "About the reading lessons," he said over lunch, "I should probably warn you that I'm not the easiest student. I can recognize most words, but stringing them together into sentences that make sense, that's where I struggle. We'll start with simple texts and work our way up. Do you have any books in the house?" Boone looked embarrassed. "A few. Eleanor kept some novels, and there's a Bible, of course. But I'm not sure they're the right level for someone like me. Let me see what you have, and I'll assess where to begin." The afternoon was spent settling Alma into her new room and beginning their first lesson. Among Eleanor's books, she found a collection of simple stories and poems that would serve their purpose. Boone's reading was indeed halting, but she could see intelligence in his approach to unfamiliar words. "You're not giving yourself enough credit," she told him after he'd struggled through a paragraph about a farmer and his horse. "You understand the meaning even when you stumble over the words. Eleanor used to say the same thing, but I always felt like I was disappointing her when I couldn't keep up with her reading. Learning is not a race, Mr. McCall. It's a conversation between you and the text. Take your time." As evening approached, Alma found herself in the kitchen preparing supper, the first meal she'd cooked in months. The simple act of chopping vegetables and seasoning meat felt like reclaiming a part of herself she'd thought lost forever. "Smells better than anything I've made in years," Boone said, returning from his evening chores. "I'm afraid I've been living on beans and hardtack mostly." "Well, we can't have that. A man needs proper nutrition, especially if he's going to be learning to read." They ate by lamplight, and Alma was surprised by how easily conversation flowed between them. Boone asked thoughtful questions about her music, and she found herself curious about the day-to-day operations of a cattle ranch. "The drought's been hard on everyone," he said, when she asked about the condition of his herd. "We've lost about a third of our normal rainfall this year, and the grass isn't growing like it should. What happens if it doesn't rain soon? I'll have to sell more cattle than I planned, maybe take a loss to keep the rest alive. It's the way of ranching. Some years are good. Some years test your resolve." After supper, Alma settled at Eleanor's organ, while Boone worked on copying letters from one of the books. The instrument wheezed and groaned, but gradually began to respond to her touch. She played quietly, simple melodies that wouldn't disturb his concentration. "That's beautiful," he said during a pause in her playing. "What was it?" "Just an old hymn. Amazing Grace. I learned it when I was 12. Eleanor used to hum that one while she worked in the garden." The mention of his wife settled between them comfortably rather than awkwardly. Alma was beginning to understand that Eleanor's memory was part of the fabric of this place, woven into its very walls. Rather than feeling like an intruder, she was starting to see herself as someone who might help preserve that memory while creating something new. As they prepared to retire for the evening, Boone paused at the door to her room. Miss Hayes, I want you to know that this feels right. Having someone here, I mean. The house feels more like itself again. Thank you, Mr. McCall. I feel the same way. That night, as she listened to the sounds of the prairie settling into darkness, Alma felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where she belonged. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Alma had established a routine that brought order to both their lives. She rose early to prepare breakfast while Boone tended to the morning chores, and by the time he returned to the house, the smell of coffee and bacon would greet him along with her cheerful, "Good morning." The ramp Boone had built proved to be a masterpiece of practical engineering, sturdy enough to support her wheelchair, but gradual enough to navigate easily. More importantly, it had been built with an understanding of her dignity. Rather than appearing as an obvious accommodation, it looked like a natural extension of the porch, complete with railings that matched the house's existing woodwork. "You have a gift for this kind of work," Alma had told him the day he'd finished it. "This doesn't look like a ramp at all. It looks like the porch was always meant to be this way." "Eleanor always said I thought too much about how things looked," he'd replied, clearly pleased by her praise. "She used to joke that I spent more time planning the henhouse than some men spend planning their weddings." The henhouse comment had led to Alma's discovery of another of Boone's talent. She was surprisingly skilled with medicinal herbs. Behind the kitchen, Eleanor had planted a small garden of healing plants that Boone had maintained with careful attention. Chamomile for sleeplessness, willow bark for pain, echinacea for building strength against illness. "Eleanor started this garden when we first married," he explained as they worked together to harvest the summer's growth. "She said store-bought remedies were fine for some things, but nothing beat what God grew in your own backyard." Alma found herself drawn to the herb garden for reasons that went beyond its practical value. The daily pain in her legs, a constant companion since the fever, seemed more manageable when she could craft her own teas and tinctures. There was something deeply satisfying about taking control of her own healing, about understanding which plants could offer relief and which could restore strength. "This willow bark tea is remarkable," she said one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. "I haven't felt this comfortable in months." Eleanor developed that recipe. She said the secret was adding just a touch of mint to cut the bitterness. She was a wise woman. She was. Sometimes I think she knew more about healing than the doctor in town. As the summer progressed, Alma began to understand the rhythm of ranch life. The cattle needed constant attention-checking for signs of illness, ensuring adequate water, moving them to fresh pasture when possible. The drought was making all of this more difficult, and she could see the worry lines deepening around Boone's eyes as he watched the sky each morning, hoping for clouds that rarely came. "How bad is it?" she asked one afternoon, when he returned from checking the herd, looking particularly grim. "Bad enough. I've lost 2 more head this week, and the rest are getting thin. If we don't get rain soon, I'll have to make some hard choices." "What kind of choices?" "Sell the cattle for whatever I can get, or watch them die and lose everything." He sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking older than his 55 years. "I've been ranching for 30 years, and I've never seen a drought like this one." Alma had been working on the ranch's books, another skill that proved useful in their arrangement. Her mathematical abilities and neat handwriting had brought order to Boone's financial records, and she'd begun to understand the precarious nature of their situation. "The water rights," she said carefully. "Have you considered approaching the Hendersons about sharing their well? The Hendersons and I haven't spoken since the boundary dispute 2 years ago. They're not likely to help me out of Christian charity, but they might be willing to negotiate a business arrangement. You have something they need: access to the southern pastures where their cattle could graze. They have something you need: water." Boone looked at her with surprise. "You've been thinking about this?" "I've been thinking about a lot of things. This ranch is your life's work, Mr. McCall. There has to be a way to save it." Their evening reading lessons had become a highlight of both their days. Boone's progress was steady, if not spectacular, and Alma found herself looking forward to his mixture of frustration and triumph as he worked through increasingly complex passages. "Try this one," she said. opening to a poem by William Wordsworth. Don't worry about perfect pronunciation, just focus on the meaning. I wandered lonely as a cloud, Boone read slowly, that floats on high or vales and hills. Beautiful, keep going. When all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. He paused, looking up at her. That's about flowers, isn't it? He's describing flowers. It is. What do you think he means by lonely as a cloud? Maybe that he felt separate from everything, floating above it all instead of being part of it. Alma smiled. That's exactly right. You understand poetry better than you think. Eleanor would have liked hearing me read that to her. I think she would have been proud of how hard you're working to learn. The mention of Eleanor had become easier over the weeks, less painful, and more like sharing memories of a beloved friend. Alma was beginning to understand that Eleanor's presence in the house wasn't something to be erased or competed with, but rather honored and continued. There's something I've been meaning to tell you, Boone said one evening as they sat listening to the sounds of the prairie settling into darkness, about my son Thomas. I'm listening. The fight we had it was about his choice of wife. She wasn't what Eleanor and I expected for him. Different background, different way of thinking about things. I said some things I shouldn't have said. We all say things we regret when we're protecting someone we love. That's just it, I wasn't protecting him. I was protecting my own idea of what his life should look like. And by the time I realized that, he was gone. Alma could hear the pain in his voice, the regret that had been eating at him for 3 years. Have you thought about what you'd say to him if you had the chance? Every day, but thinking about it and actually doing it are different things. Perhaps we could work on that letter we discussed. Even if you never send it, the act of writing might help you organize your thoughts. You'd help me with that? I'd be honored to help you with that. As summer deepened and the drought continued its relentless hold on the land, Alma found herself settling into a life she'd never expected but was beginning to cherish. The isolation that might have bothered her in town felt like peace here, and the daily challenges of ranch life gave her a sense of purpose she'd been missing for years. More importantly, she was beginning to understand Boone McCall not just as a kind man who'd offered her shelter, but as someone whose quiet strength and gentle wisdom were exactly what her wounded heart needed to heal. The evening Boone finally spoke about Thomas in detail. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The day had been particularly difficult. They'd lost another steer to the drought, and the remaining cattle were showing signs of serious stress. But it wasn't the immediate crisis that had brought the shadow to Boone's eyes. I found this today while I was looking for fence wire, he said, pulling a small wooden object from his pocket. It was a toy horse, carved with obvious care and worn smooth by countless small hands. Thomas whittled this when he was 8 years old, spent weeks on it, trying to get the proportions just right. Alma took the carved horse when he offered it, turning it over in her hands. The craftsmanship was remarkable for a child's work, the flowing lines of the mane, the alert ears, the proud arch of the neck. Someone had loved this little horse deeply. He was always good with his hands, Boone continued. Could fix anything, build anything. Eleanor used to say he got that from me, but the patience to do it right that came from her. What happened between you? Alma asked gently. Boone was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old regret. Thomas brought home a girl when he was 22. Said he was going to marry her. Her name was Sarah, and she wasn't what we expected. In what way? She'd been married before, for one thing. Had a little girl from that marriage. And her family, they were what you might call rough people. Her father drank. Her brothers had been in trouble with the law. Eleanor and we thought Thomas was making a mistake. Alma could see where this story was heading, and her heart ached for all of them. You tried to talk him out of it. We did more than that. We told him he wasn't welcome to bring her around the ranch. Said if he married her, he'd have to choose between his new family and us. Oh, Boone. I know how it sounds now, but at the time, I thought I was protecting him. I thought if he just had time to think about it, he'd see reason. What did he do? He married her anyway. Sent us a letter saying he was sorry we couldn't be part of his happiness, but he wasn't going to abandon Sarah and her daughter for our approval. Boone's voice cracked slightly. That was 3 years ago. Haven't heard from him since. Alma handed the toy horse back to him, and he tucked it carefully into his shirt pocket. Have you learned anything about his life since then? I hear things. Sarah's first husband died in a mining accident, left her with nothing but debts and a baby to raise. Thomas took a job at the lumber mill in Cedar Creek, and from what I understand, he's doing well, supporting his family, staying out of trouble. And Sarah? By all accounts, she's a good mother and a faithful wife, keeps a clean house, helps with the church social events. Everything I was too stubborn to see when I was busy judging her past. The admission hung between them as the last light faded from the western sky. Alma understood now why Boone had been carrying this burden for so long. It wasn't just the loss of his son, but the knowledge that his own prejudice had caused it. You know what you need to do, she said quietly. I know, but knowing and doing are different things. What if he doesn't want to hear from me? What if I've waited too long? What if you haven't? That night, after Boone had gone upstairs to bed, Alma sat at the kitchen table with paper and ink, helping him draft the letter he'd been avoiding for 3 years. It was slow work, not because of his limited writing skills, but because finding the right words to express such deep regret was a challenge that would have tested any writer. Dear Thomas, they began, and then spent an hour struggling with the next sentence. I want to tell him I was wrong, but I also want to explain why I acted the way I did. Boone said, frustration evident in his voice. I don't want to make excuses, but I want him to understand that I thought I was protecting him. Then say that. Say you were wrong, and say you thought you were protecting him. Sometimes the truth is the best place to start. By midnight, they had managed 2 paragraphs, a beginning that acknowledged his mistakes without making excuses, and an expression of his desire to meet Sarah and her daughter properly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next morning brought news that made their personal struggles seem small by comparison. Walter Grimm arrived on horseback, his face grim with the kind of news that spreads quickly through rural communities. The Johnson place burned out completely, he reported. Lightning strike in the middle of the night. They lost everything, house, barn, most of their cattle. Alma watched Boone's face as he processed this information. The Johnsons were neighbors, people who would have helped him without question if the situation were reversed. What do they need? Boone asked. Everything. Jim's talking about giving up, heading back east to live with his brother. Says he's too old to start over. Like hell he is. We'll organize a barn raising, get the whole community involved, and they can graze their remaining cattle on my south pasture until they get back on their feet. Boone, you can't afford to give up grazing land, not with the drought. I can afford it better than I can afford to let good neighbors lose everything because of bad luck. Alma felt a surge of admiration for this man who would sacrifice his own struggling resources to help others. It was exactly the kind of generosity that Eleanor must have fallen in love with, and exactly the kind of character that would make a father worth reconciling with. I'll help organize the women for cooking and supplies, she said, and I can work on the financial planning, figure out how to make the most of what everyone can contribute. You don't have to. Yes, I do. This community welcomed me when I had nothing. Now I have something to give back. The barn raising was scheduled for the following weekend, and as word spread throughout the territory, Alma began to understand the true nature of frontier life. These people might live miles apart, but they were bound together by the understanding that survival depended on mutual support. As she worked on the letter to Thomas during quiet evening hours, Alma found herself thinking about the connections that make a life meaningful. Boone's estrangement from his son had been caused by his failure to understand that love sometimes means accepting what you can't control. The community's response to the Johnsons' tragedy showed what happened when people chose connection over isolation. I think I'm beginning to understand what Eleanor saw in you, she told Boone one evening as they worked on the letter together. What do you mean? Your heart. You have the kind of heart that puts other people's needs ahead of your own comfort. That's a rare quality. Eleanor used to say I was too soft for my own good. There's a difference between being soft and being kind. You're kind, Boone, and kindness takes more strength than hardness ever could." As they finished another paragraph of the letter to Thomas, Alma realized that she was no longer just helping Boone heal his relationship with his son, she was helping him understand his own worth. And in doing so, she was beginning to understand her own. The morning of the barn raising dawned clear and warm, with the first hint of clouds on the western horizon in weeks. Alma woke to the sound of hammering and voices. Boone had been up since before dawn, working on his latest project, with the focused intensity she'd come to recognize as his way of showing love. "Don't look," he called from the barn as she wheeled out onto the porch with her morning coffee. "It's not finished yet." "I'm not looking," she replied, though her curiosity was almost overwhelming. For the past 2 weeks, he'd been working on something in the barn after his evening chores, always emerging with wood shavings in his hair and a satisfied expression on his face. The barn raising brought together neighbors from 20 miles in every direction. Families arrived in wagons loaded with tools, lumber, and enough food to feed a small army. Alma found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity, coordinating supplies and managing the complex logistics of feeding 40 people throughout the day. "You're a natural at this," said Martha Henderson, the wife of the neighboring rancher who'd had the boundary dispute with Boone. "I've never seen a barn raising run so smoothly." "It helps to have experience managing large groups," Alma replied, though she was pleased by the compliment. "I used to organize church socials back in Cedar Creek." "Well, you certainly know what you're doing. And I have to say, Boone seems like a different man since you arrived, more like his old self." The comment made Alma pause in her work. She'd been so focused on how much her own life had improved that she hadn't considered how the arrangement might be affecting Boone. But watching him work alongside the other men, laughing at their jokes and offering suggestions with quiet confidence, she could see what Martha meant. "He's been very kind to me," she said carefully. "Kind, yes, but it's more than that. He's been carrying such a heavy burden since Eleanor died. Having you here seems to have reminded him that life can still hold joy." As the day progressed, Alma found herself thinking about Martha's words. The barn was taking shape rapidly under the skilled hands of the community, and she could see the pride in Jim Johnson's eyes as his neighbors literally rebuilt his future. But she also noticed the way Boone kept glancing in her direction, as if making sure she was comfortable and included in the day's activities. "Time for lunch," she announced, and the organized chaos of a community meal began. Tables were set up in the shade of the old oak tree, and women who rarely saw each other except at church socials caught up on news while passing platters of fried chicken and cornbread. "Miss Hayes," said young Mary Peterson, who couldn't have been more than 16, "is it true you used to be a music teacher?" "I was indeed. I taught piano and organ for many years." "Ma says you might be willing to give lessons. I've been wanting to learn to play hymns for our church services." Before Alma could respond, several other women had gathered around, their children peeking out from behind their skirts. The conversation that followed revealed something she hadn't expected, a genuine hunger for music and education in this isolated community. "There's no one closer than Cedar Creek who teaches music," explained Susan Mitchell, whose twin boys were clearly fascinated by the idea of piano lessons. "And that's too far for regular lessons." "I'd be happy to teach," Alma said, "though I should mention that I use a wheelchair, which might make it difficult for some families to bring their children to lessons." "Oh, we'd work something out," Mary said quickly. "Maybe you could come to our house once a week, and we could rotate among the families." "That's very thoughtful, but I'm not sure how practical it would be." "We could make it work," said a deep voice behind her. Boone had approached the group, his face streaked with sawdust and sweat from the morning's work. "I've been thinking about getting a proper wagon anyway, something more comfortable for longer trips." The easy way he included her in his future plans made Alma's heart skip a beat. She was becoming accustomed to his thoughtfulness, but this felt different, more permanent, more like a genuine partnership. "That's settled then," Martha Henderson said with satisfaction. "You'll have more students than you know what to do with." As the afternoon wore on and the barn neared completion, Alma found herself in conversation with Jim Johnson about the challenges of starting over after losing everything. "The hardest part isn't the physical loss," he said, watching his neighbors work to restore what the fire had taken. "It's the feeling that maybe this is a sign I should give up, that I'm too old to rebuild." "How old are you, Mr. Johnson?" 58 come October." "Then you're hardly too old for anything. Some of the most accomplished people I've known did their best work after 50. "You really think so?" "I know so. Look at what you've built here, not just the ranch, but the relationships that brought all these people together to help you. That's not something you can lose to a fire." As the sun began to set, the new barn stood complete, its fresh-cut lumber gleaming in the golden light. The community gathered for a final meal and the traditional blessing of the new structure. Alma found herself seated next to Boone, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his sun-warmed skin. "Thank you," Jim Johnson said to the assembled crowd. "I don't have words for what this means to me and my family, but I promise you this barn will be here for the next generation and the one after that." The crowd began to disperse as families loaded their wagons and headed home. Alma was helping to clean up when Boone appeared at her elbow. "Now you can look," he said with a smile that was almost boyish. She followed him to the barn, where he'd built something that took her breath away. In the corner, accessible by a gentle ramp, he'd constructed a small platform that looked out through a window toward the western horizon. It was furnished with a comfortable chair and a small table, clearly designed as a place where someone could sit and watch the sunset. "You built this for me," she said, hardly believing what she was seeing. "I thought you might like a place to watch the sky change colors without having to navigate the porch steps every evening." "Boone, this is—" She stopped, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever built for me. I wanted you to have a place that was yours, a place where you could be comfortable and still feel part of everything." As they sat together on the platform, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of purple and gold, Alma realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. The practical arrangement they'd agreed to was evolving into something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to love. "The letter to Thomas," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I think we should finish it soon." "Why the urgency?" "Because I think you're ready to be the father he needs, and I think he's ready to have his father back." Boone was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. What if he's not? What if too much time has passed? "Then at least you'll have tried, and that's something Eleanor would have wanted you to do. You know, sometimes I think she sent you to me, to help me find my way back to the things that matter. Maybe she did, and maybe she also sent me here to find my own way back to life." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Alma felt the weight of possibility settling around them like a warm blanket. Whatever was growing between them, it was built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care, exactly the kind of love that could weather any storm. The letter to Thomas had been finished for 3 days, sitting on the kitchen table like an accusation. Boone had read it through dozens of times, each reading followed by another excuse for why tomorrow would be a better day to mail it. Alma watched him struggle with the decision, understanding that some wounds take more courage to heal than others. "I could ride into town today," she offered over breakfast. "Mail it for you if you'd like." "I should do it myself. It's my responsibility. The important thing is that it gets sent, not who does the sending." "Maybe one more day. Let me read it through once more." Alma was preparing to argue when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching the house. Visitors were rare at the ranch, especially on a weekday morning. Boone went to the window, his face creasing with concern. "It's Walter Grimm. He's riding hard." Walter's horse was lathered with sweat, and the station agent's face was flushed with exertion and excitement. He dismounted quickly, clutching a worn leather satchel against his chest. "Boone, Miss Hayes, I'm glad you're both here. I've got something you need to see." "What is it, Walter? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Close enough. I was cleaning out the back storage room at the station, getting ready for the new mail sorting system, when I found this." He held up the satchel. It was wedged behind some old crates, covered in dust. Must have been there for years. Alma felt a chill of premonition. What's in it? Letters. A whole satchel full of letters that were never delivered. Some of them are addressed to you, Boone. Boone's face went pale. From who? Your son. They're all from Thomas. The silence that followed was so complete that Alma could hear her own heartbeat. Boone reached for the satchel with trembling hands, his face a mixture of hope and disbelief. How many? He asked quietly. 17, dating back 3 years. Walter's revelation hit the kitchen like a physical blow. Alma watched Boone's face cycle through confusion, anger, and something that might have been desperate hope as he opened the first letter with hands that shook visibly. This is dated 6 months after he left, Boone said, his voice barely above a whisper. 6 months. What does it say? Alma asked gently. Boone began to read aloud, his voice breaking with emotion. Dear Pa, I know we said things we didn't mean, but I miss you and Ma terribly. Sarah is with child, and I want our baby to know its grandfather. I was wrong to speak to you the way I did, and I hope you can forgive me. Please write back. Your son, Thomas. The letter fluttered to the table as Boone covered his face with his hands. Walter shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting his role as the bearer of such painful news. Who had these letters? Alma asked, her voice sharp with anger. Who kept them from being delivered? Jake Morrison. He worked for me for about 2 years before he moved on to Denver. I found his name on some of the notations in the sorting records. Why would he do such a thing? I don't know. Maybe he was lazy. Maybe he was stealing mail for some other purpose. All I know is that these letters should have been delivered years ago. Alma looked at the scattered envelopes on the table, each one representing a moment when Thomas had reached out to his father, only to be met with silence that he must have interpreted as rejection. The tragedy of it made her chest tight with grief. I have to go to him, Boone said suddenly, standing up so quickly that his chair scraped against the floor. I have to go to Cedar Creek and find him. Boone, wait, read the rest of the letters first. You need to understand what you're walking into. For the next hour, they worked through the correspondence chronologically. The story that emerged was heartbreaking in its arc, from hope to resignation. The early letters were full of love and apology, updates about Sarah's pregnancy, requests for reconciliation. The middle letters showed growing hurt and confusion at his father's continued silence. The most recent ones were brief and formal, dutiful reports on family milestones that carried the weight of profound disappointment. This one is from last Christmas, Boone said, holding up a letter with particular care. He writes about his daughter. Her name is Grace, and she's 2 years old. He says she has Eleanor's eyes. Alma read over his shoulder. I named her Grace Eleanor McCall, hoping that someday she might meet the grandmother she's named for. Sarah says I should stop writing, that your silence is answer enough, but I can't give up, hoping that you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. We're doing well. I've been promoted to floor supervisor at the mill, and Sarah is expecting our second child in the spring. I love you, Pa, and I hope you can love us too. Your son, Thomas. He never stopped trying, Alma said softly. Even when he thought you didn't want to hear from him, he kept writing. And I was sitting here feeling sorry for myself, thinking he didn't care enough to reach out. Boone's voice was thick with regret. All this time I could have been part of their lives. I could have been a grandfather. You still can be, Alma said firmly. It's not too late. What if it is? What if he's given up on me completely? Walter, who had been quietly gathering the empty envelopes, cleared his throat. If it helps, Boone, I saw him in town about a month ago. He was asking about you, wondering if you were well. Didn't seem like a man who'd given up entirely. He was asking about me. Said he'd heard about the drought and was worried about how you were managing. I told him you were doing fine, that you had help now. Walter nodded toward Alma. He seemed glad to hear it. The revelation that Thomas had been concerned about his father's welfare, even after years of apparent silence, seemed to galvanize Boone's resolve. He began gathering the letters, organizing them by date, with the careful attention he brought to all important tasks. I need to go to Cedar Creek, he said. Today, I need to see him face to face and explain what happened. I'll come with you, Alma said immediately. You don't need to. Yes, I do. You supported me when I needed it most. Now it's my turn to support you. It's a long ride for someone in your condition. My condition won't prevent me from being there when you need me, and frankly, you might need someone to help you find the right words when you see him. Walter offered to accompany them part way, and within an hour they were loaded into Boone's wagon with the precious letters secured in a wooden box. The journey to Cedar Creek would take most of the day, giving them time to plan what Boone would say to the son he'd lost through a cruel combination of pride and circumstance. As they traveled, Alma found herself thinking about the fragility of human connection. A lazy postal worker's negligence had cost this family 3 years of shared joy, 3 years of a grandfather's love that Grace Eleanor McCall would never remember. But perhaps it wasn't too late to salvage something from the wreckage. What if he's angry? Boone asked, as they crested a hill that gave them their first view of Cedar Creek in the distance. Then you'll apologize, and you'll keep apologizing until he understands that you never stopped loving him. And if he doesn't forgive me, then at least you'll have tried, and that's something you can live with. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon as they entered Cedar Creek, and Alma felt the weight of the moment settling around them. In a few hours, Boone would either be reunited with his son or face the final confirmation that some wounds can't be healed. But as she watched him straighten his shoulders and set his jaw with determination, she knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. The practical arrangement that had brought them together had evolved into something much more precious, a partnership built on mutual support and genuine love. The letters had revealed a tragedy, but they had also revealed an opportunity. Sometimes the most devastating discoveries can become the foundation for the most profound healing. The lumber mill in Cedar Creek operated with the rhythmic precision of a well-tuned instrument, the sound of saws and hammers, creating a symphony that spoke of honest work and steady progress. Alma sat in the wagon outside the mill office, watching Boone gather his courage to face the son he hadn't seen in 3 years. The box of letters rested on the seat between them, a tangible reminder of all the time they'd lost and all the hope they might yet recover. He'll be finishing his shift soon, Boone said, checking his pocket watch for the 3rd time in as many minutes. The mill closes at 5. Are you ready for this? I don't think anyone can be ready for something like this, but I know I can't live with myself if I don't try. As they waited, Alma found herself thinking about the dress pattern she'd carefully preserved in her hope chest for so many years. It was a simple design cream-colored silk with pearl buttons and delicate lace, trim intended for a wedding that she'd long since accepted would never happen. But sitting here beside Boone, preparing to help him reunite with his family, she felt something stirring in her heart that she'd thought was gone forever. The idea of marriage had become more than a distant dream over the past months. It had become a possibility, discussed in quiet moments and gentle touches, in the way Boone looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. They'd never spoken of it directly, but the understanding hung between them like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. "There he is," Boone said suddenly, his voice tight with emotion. Thomas McCall emerged from the mill office, and Alma's first thought was how much he resembled his father. He had the same broad shoulders, the same careful way of moving, the same thoughtful expression that suggested a man who considered his actions before taking them. But where Boone's face showed the lines of hard-won wisdom, Thomas's showed the strain of carrying disappointment. "Pa," Thomas's voice carried across the mill yard, disbelief evident in every syllable. "Hello, son." The two men stood facing each other across 20 feet of dusty ground, and Alma could feel the weight of their shared history in the silence that stretched between them. Finally, Thomas began walking toward the wagon, his steps hesitant but determined. "This is Miss Alma Hayes," Boone said when Thomas reached them. "She's been helping me with the ranch." "Ma'am," Thomas said, tipping his hat politely. But his eyes remained fixed on his father, searching for some explanation for this unexpected visit. "I brought something that belongs to you," Boone said, lifting the box of letters from the wagon seat. Or rather, something that should have belonged to you a long time ago. Thomas's expression shifted from confusion to recognition as Boone explained about the hidden letters, about Jake Morrison's negligence, about the 3 years of silence that had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding. With each revelation, Thomas's face showed a mixture of relief, anger, and something that might have been hope. "You never got any of them?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not a single one. I thought you didn't want anything to do with me after what I said. And I thought you didn't want anything to do with me after what I said." The two men stared at each other for a long moment, and Alma saw the exact moment when years of hurt began to crack under the weight of truth. Thomas's shoulders sagged as if he'd been carrying a heavy burden that he could finally set down. "I have a daughter," Thomas said quietly. "Her name is Grace. She's 2 years old." "I know. I read all your letters on the way here, and I know about the baby that's coming. Sarah, me wife, she's been wanting to meet you. She said if you ever came around, she'd make your favorite meal. Had to ask around town to find out what that was." "She didn't need to go to all that trouble." "Yes, she did. She said any man who raised someone like you deserved to be welcomed properly." The simple acceptance in Thomas's voice seemed to break something loose in Boone. Alma watched as 3 years of regret and self-recrimination crumbled in the face of his son's forgiveness. "I'm sorry," Boone said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry for the things I said, for the way I treated Sarah, for all the time we lost. I'm sorry too, Pa. I said some things that weren't fair. You were defending your wife. That's what a man should do. And you were trying to protect me. That's what a father should do." The reconciliation happened gradually, like the slow healing of a deep wound. They talked through the afternoon, sharing 3 years of experiences that should have been shared in real time. Thomas spoke about his work at the mill, about Sarah's pregnancy, about Grace's first steps and first words. Boone talked about the ranch, about Eleanor's death, about the loneliness that had nearly consumed him. "I want you to meet Sarah properly," Thomas said as the sun began to set. "And I want Grace to meet her grandfather. I'd like that very much. Will you come to supper tomorrow? Sarah's been preparing for this day for months, even though she didn't know it was coming." As they made plans for the family dinner, Alma felt herself becoming part of something larger than her own story. She was witnessing the restoration of a family, the healing of wounds that had seemed permanent. But more than that, she was seeing the man she'd come to love become whole again. "Miss Hayes," Thomas said, turning to her with genuine warmth, "I hope you'll join us for supper as well. Sarah's been curious about the woman who's been taking such good care of Pa." "I'd be honored," Alma replied, though she felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect of meeting Thomas's wife. That evening, as they prepared to spend the night at the hotel in town, Boone was quiet and thoughtful. They'd taken adjoining rooms, maintaining the propriety that had governed their relationship from the beginning, but Alma could sense his need for company. "How are you feeling?" she asked as they sat in the hotel's small parlor. "Like I've been carrying a stone in my chest for 3 years, and someone just lifted it out. It's going to take time to fully heal. 3 years of misunderstanding can't be erased in an afternoon." "I know. But the fact that he's willing to try, that he still wants me to be part of his life, that's more than I deserved. You deserve to have your letters delivered. You deserve to know that your son never stopped loving you." Boone was quiet for a long moment, his fingers worrying the wedding ring he still wore. "Alma, there's something I need to tell you." "I'm listening." "These past months with you, they've been the happiest I've felt since Eleanor died. Maybe even happier than that, because I'm not the same man I was then. I've learned things about myself, about what matters, about what kind of love can survive difficult times." Alma's heart began to beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, not as a friend, not as a convenient arrangement, but as a woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. I know it's not what we agreed to when you first came to the ranch, but I can't pretend anymore that this is just about reading lessons and companionship." The words hung in the air between them, and Alma felt the weight of possibility settling around her like a warm embrace. She'd known this moment was coming, had felt it building between them for weeks, but hearing him say it aloud made it real in a way that took her breath away. "I love you too," she said simply. "I've loved you for weeks, maybe months, but I was afraid to say it, afraid to hope for something that seemed too good to be true. Nothing about this is too good to be true. We've both earned the right to be happy. What happens now? Now we go to dinner tomorrow, and I introduce you to my family as the woman I intend to marry, if you'll have me." Alma reached for his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of years of honest work, the strength that had supported her through her darkest moments. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll have you." As they sat together in the quiet hotel parlor, planning their future with the same careful attention they'd brought to their past, Alma realized that her wedding dress pattern might finally serve its intended purpose. The dream she'd carried for so long was about to become reality, not in the way she'd imagined, but in a way that was infinitely better. Tomorrow they would face Thomas's family as a united couple, ready to build new relationships on the foundation of old love made new. The storm clouds gathering on the horizon seemed to promise the rain they'd been praying for, and Alma felt as if the very sky was blessing their new beginning. Everything was falling into place with the precision of a well-planned song, each note building toward a crescendo that would change their lives forever. The McCall family home in Cedar Creek was a modest, two-story house with a white picket fence and roses climbing the front porch, the kind of place that spoke of young love and careful budgeting, of dreams being built one small step at a time. As Boone helped Alma from the wagon, she could see the nervous excitement in his eyes, the way a man looks when he's about to reclaim something precious that he'd thought lost forever. Sarah McCall appeared in the doorway before they'd even reached the gate, and Alma's first impression was of warmth and genuine kindness. She was a petite woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes, dressed in her Sunday best, despite the fact that it was Wednesday evening. In her arms, she carried a little girl with Eleanor's eyes and Boone's stubborn chin. "Mr. McCall," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotion Alma could see in her expression. "Welcome to our home." "Thank you, Sarah. And please, call me Boone. We're family now." The simple acceptance in his voice seemed to break the last of the tension. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she stepped forward to embrace her father-in-law properly for the first time. "I've been hoping for this day for so long," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thomas talks about you constantly, about the things you taught him, about how much he's missed you. I've missed him too, more than I can say." Grace, who had been watching the adult interaction with the serious curiosity of a 2-year-old, suddenly reached out from her mother's arms toward Boone. "Grandpa?" she said, the word coming out as a question. Boone's face crumpled with emotion as he took his granddaughter into his arms. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm your grandpa. Mama said you were tall like Papa. I am tall like Papa, and you're beautiful like Mama." Grace giggled and patted Boone's cheek with her small hand. "You have whiskers." "I do. Do you like whiskers?" "I like whiskers." The easy acceptance of a child who knew nothing of adult complications seemed to heal something in Boone that words couldn't touch. Alma watched as he cradled his granddaughter, saw the wonder in his eyes as he discovered this piece of his heart that had been missing for so long. "Mrs. Hayes," Sarah said, turning to Alma with genuine warmth, "I'm so glad you could join us. Thomas has told me how much you've meant to his father. Please, call me Alma, and I'm grateful to be included in such a special evening. Thomas tells me you're a musician. Grace loves music. She's always humming or singing something." "I sing," Grace announced from her grandfather's arms. "Mama taught me Jesus loves me." "Would you like to sing it for us?" Alma asked. What followed was the sweetest, most off-key rendition of the beloved hymn that Alma had ever heard. Grace's voice was thin and uncertain, but filled with the pure joy that only children can bring to music. When she finished, both Boone and Thomas were wiping their eyes. "That was beautiful, sweetheart," Boone said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your great-grandmother Eleanor would have loved to hear you sing." "Tell me about great-grandma Eleanor," Grace demanded with the directness of childhood. As they moved into the house for dinner, Boone began to tell his granddaughter about the woman she'd been named for, about Eleanor's garden and her cooking, about the way she'd sung while she worked. The stories flowed easily, and Alma could see Thomas relaxing as he listened to his father speak about his mother, without the weight of grief that had surrounded her memory for so long. The dining room was set with Sarah's best china, and the meal she'd prepared was a feast that spoke of both celebration and nervous energy. Roast chicken with herb stuffing, fresh bread, green beans from her garden, and an apple pie that made the whole house smell like autumn. "This is Eleanor's recipe," Sarah said, serving the pie. "Mrs. Henderson gave it to me when I first married Thomas. She said it was the best apple pie in the territory." "It was," Boone agreed, tasting a forkful. "You've made it perfectly." During the meal, Alma found herself studying the family Bible that sat on the side border, massive leather-bound volume that clearly held the record of McCall family history. The binding was worn smooth by countless hands, and she could see the edges of pages where names and dates had been carefully recorded over the years. "That belonged to my grandfather," Thomas explained, noticing her interest. "Every birth, marriage, and death in our family is recorded in there." "It's beautiful," Alma said. "Such records are precious things. Sarah's been keeping it up since we married. Grace's birth is recorded there, and soon we'll add the new baby's name." "When is the baby due?" Alma asked. "December," Sarah replied, her hand resting protectively on her rounded stomach. "We're hoping for a boy this time, but we'll be happy with whatever God gives us." As the evening progressed, Alma could see the family healing happening in real time. Thomas and his father fell into their old rhythm of conversation, sharing stories and memories that bridged the gap of their separation. Sarah's gentle presence seemed to remind everyone that they were building something new together, not just restoring what had been lost. "I have something for you," Boone said to Thomas as they prepared to leave. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out the carved wooden horse that had been Thomas's childhood treasure. "You kept it all these years?" "I kept it because it reminded me of the boy who made it, the boy who had patience and skill and the determination to get things right." Thomas turned the little horse over in his hands, and Alma could see the memories flooding back afternoons, spent whittling on the porch, his father's patient instruction, the pride of completing his first real carving. "I want Grace to have this," Thomas said. "I want her to know that her grandfather made toys for her daddy when he was little." "Grandpa made this?" Grace asked, reaching for the horse with reverent hands. "He did, and someday when you're older, I'll teach you how to carve your own toys." As they said their goodbyes, Alma felt the profound satisfaction of witnessing a family made whole again. The Bible on the sideboard seemed to represent more than just a record of births and deaths. It was a testament to the continuity of love, the way families endure through generations despite the wounds that time and pride can inflict. The next morning dawned with the first real promise of rain in months' dark clouds, building on the western horizon and the sweet scent of moisture in the air. Alma woke to the sound of thunder in the distance and felt her heart lift with the knowledge that the drought might finally be breaking. But more than that, she felt the anticipation of what this day would bring. Boone had asked her to meet him at the small church on the outskirts of Cedar Creek, where Thomas and Sarah had been married 3 years ago. "I want to do this right," he'd said the night before. "I want to ask you properly, in a place that means something." The church was a simple white building with a bell tower that caught the morning light, surrounded by a cemetery where generations of Cedar Creek families rested under weathered headstones. Eleanor McCall's grave was marked by a modest stone, carved with her name and the words, "Beloved Wife and Mother." Alma found Boone standing beside Eleanor's grave, his hat in his hands, speaking quietly to the woman who had been his first love. She approached slowly, not wanting to intrude on what was clearly a private moment. "I brought her flowers," he said when he noticed her presence. "Wild roses from the prairie, like the ones she planted by our porch. She would have loved them. I told her about you, about how you've helped me find my way back to living instead of just surviving. I think she would have liked you." "I hope so. I've come to feel like I know her through the stories you've told, through the care she put into that house." Boone turned to face her fully, and Alma saw something in his expression that took her breath away, as a certainty and peace that hadn't been there before. I also told her that I'm ready to love again. Really love again. Not just remember what love used to feel like. Boone, let me do this properly. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a simple gold band, not ornate, but clearly chosen with care. This isn't Eleanor's ring. That's buried with her, where it belongs. This is new, for a new beginning. As he lowered himself to one knee on the soft grass, Alma felt the weight of the moment settling around them. This wasn't just a proposal, it was a declaration that they were both ready to step fully into the future they'd been building together. Alma Hayes, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion she could see in his eyes. You came into my life when I thought I was done with living. You showed me that love isn't something that happens once and then fades away. It's something that can grow and change and become new again. Will you marry me? The ring sparkled in the morning light, and Alma felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at this man who had offered her everything she'd ever wanted, not just love, but partnership, respect, and a place to belong. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I'll marry you. The ring slipped onto her finger perfectly, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. Boone stood and pulled her into his arms, and they kissed with the sweet urgency of people who had almost lost their chance at happiness. When? He asked against her lips. Soon. I don't want to wait any longer than necessary. What about your family? Don't you want them at the wedding? Alma thought about her sister in Chicago, about the few cousins scattered across the country who exchanged Christmas cards but little else. My family is here, she said. You, Thomas, Sarah, Grace, this is where I belong. As if summoned by her words, Thomas appeared at the church entrance, Grace riding on his shoulders and Sarah walking beside him with her hand resting on her growing belly. They had come to witness this moment, to officially welcome Alma into the family that had already claimed her heart. I hope we're not intruding, Thomas said, though his smile suggested he knew they were welcome. Not at all, Boone replied. I was hoping you'd be here for this. Grace clapped her hands with delight when she saw the ring on Alma's finger. Pretty, she announced. Grandpa gave you a present. He did indeed, the most wonderful present I've ever received. As the first drops of rain began to fall, they hurried into the church, where the minister was preparing for the morning service. What followed was an impromptu discussion about wedding plans, about the simple ceremony that would make their union official, about the celebration that would mark the beginning of their new life together. Next Sunday, the minister suggested. After the regular service, we could have a simple ceremony. That would give people time to prepare. That sounds perfect, Alma agreed. I don't need anything elaborate, just the people who matter most. As they walked back to the wagon through the gentle rain, Alma felt the profound satisfaction of a life that had finally found its proper shape. The drought was breaking, the family was whole again, and she was about to marry the man who had shown her that love could indeed begin again at any age. The ring on her finger caught the light from the storm clouds, and she realized that this small circle of gold represented something much larger, the promise that even the most broken things could be made whole again, that even the longest drought could end in abundance, that even the most unlikely love could become the foundation for a lifetime of happiness. Tomorrow they would return to the ranch as an engaged couple, ready to begin the practical work of building a life together. But today, in this moment, with the rain washing the dust from the world and her heart full of more joy than she'd ever thought possible, Alma Hayes was exactly where she belonged. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, 6 months after the rains had finally broken the drought and restored life to the prairie. The small church in Cedar Creek was filled with neighbors and friends who had come to witness the union of two people who had found love when they'd least expected it. Alma wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she'd sewn herself using the pattern she'd carried in her hope chest for so many years. The pearl buttons caught the morning light streaming through the church windows, and the delicate lace trim fluttered as she wheeled herself down the aisle to where Boone waited at the altar. He looked handsome in his best suit, his graying hair neatly combed and his eyes bright with the kind of happiness that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Thomas stood beside him as best man, while Sarah served as Alma's matron of honor, her new baby son sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying the weight of a ceremony that meant more than just the joining of two lives. It represented the triumph of hope over despair, of love over loneliness, of second chances over regret. The vows they exchanged were simple but profound, promises to support each other through whatever challenges lay ahead, to find joy in the everyday moments, and to build a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. "I promise to love you not in spite of the struggles we've faced, but because of how those struggles have shaped us into the people we are today," Boone said, his voice steady and sure. "You've shown me that love isn't something that happens once and then fades. It's something that can grow and change and become new again. I promise to be your partner in all things," Alma replied, her voice clear and strong. "To share your burdens and multiply your joys, to stand beside you as we build a life that honors both our past and our future." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in applause, and Alma felt the deep satisfaction of a story that had found its proper ending. As they kissed to seal their union, she could hear Grace's delighted giggle from the front pew, where she sat between her parents, clapping her small hands with infectious joy. The reception was held at the ranch, where the drought-ravaged land had been transformed by months of gentle rain. The grass was green again, the cattle were healthy and fat, and the house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and conversation. The surprise of the day came when Thomas and Sarah presented their wedding gift, a beautiful upright piano that had been delivered while they were in town for the ceremony. It stood in the corner of the main room, its polished wood gleaming in the afternoon light. "We thought the house needed music," Thomas explained as Alma ran her fingers over the keys in wonder. "Eleanor always said a home wasn't complete without music." "It's perfect," Alma whispered, too overcome with emotion to say more. She played a few notes, and the rich, clear sound filled the room, chasing away the last echoes of the silence that had haunted this place for so long. As the afternoon wore on, neighbors and friends shared stories and offered congratulations. The children played in the yard while the adults enjoyed Sarah's cooking and the fellowship of a community that had embraced Alma as one of their own. "You know," said Martha Henderson, watching Alma play hymns for the gathered crowd, "I think this is exactly what this house needed. Eleanor would be so pleased to see it full of life again." "She would," Boone agreed, his arm around his new wife's shoulders. "She always said a house was meant to be shared, not hoarded." As evening approached and the guests began to depart, Alma found herself alone with her new family. Grace had fallen asleep in her grandfather's arms, and Sarah was nursing baby David in the comfortable rocking chair that had been Eleanor's favorite spot. "Thank you," Thomas said to Alma as they cleaned up the remnants of the celebration, "for bringing him back to us, for helping him find his way to forgiveness." "He found his own way," Alma replied. "I just helped him see that the path was still there. Whatever you did, it worked. I have my father back, and Grace has her grandfather. That's a gift I'll never be able to repay." "You don't need to repay it. That's what family does. We help each other find our way home." That night, as Alma and Boone sat on the porch watching the stars appear in the clear sky, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a rejected mail-order bride, sitting on a dusty platform with no prospects and dwindling hope. Now she was a wife, a stepmother, a grandmother, and a beloved member of a community that valued her contributions. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if those letters had been delivered on time?" she asked. "Sometimes," Boone admitted. "But then I remember that if Thomas and I had reconciled 3 years ago, I might never have been in town the day you needed help. Everything happened exactly as it was meant to happen." "Even the drought?" "Even the drought. It taught us both that some things are worth fighting for, worth preserving even when the future looks uncertain." As they prepared to go inside to their shared home, Alma looked back at the piano that now graced their living room. Tomorrow, she would begin teaching music to the children of the territory, sharing the gift that had sustained her through the darkest times of her life. But tonight, she was simply a woman who had found love and belonging in the most unexpected place, with a man who had shown her that the heart's capacity for joy is limitless. The platform at Gilead Flats seemed like a lifetime ago, but Alma knew that every moment of pain and rejection had been leading her to a love that was built on understanding, to a family that was chosen rather than inherited, to a life that was exactly what she'd been meant to have all along. Sometimes the heart does find love in the most unexpected places, and sometimes it takes a lifetime of experience to recognize the difference between what we think we want and what we actually need. In the end, the greatest love stories are not about perfect people finding each other, but about broken people choosing to heal together, creating something beautiful from the fragments of their individual sorrows.